The first thing Maribel found under the water trough was not water. It was a tin box, flat as a Bible, and wrapped in oilcloth, so old it cracked beneath her fingers. Ledger lay beside the trough with dust on his silver muzzle, panting like each breath had to be borrowed. His claws had bled into the wood where he had scratched through the loose boards, but he would not look away from the gap he had opened. Mara almost left the box there. A widow with a bank notice on her table had no business digging up trouble. Ridgefall Ranch had already been judged worthless by every man who claimed to understand land. The well was dry. The creek bed was white. The windmill was a skeleton turning over bad water. Thomas Bell had died 3 years earlier, chasing a water line Crowther Bank swore had never existed. Folks said grief made Mara buy the place. But Ledger had followed Thomas across every dry survey line, until the day Thomas never came home. And now, the old dog had dug in the exact place Thomas used to kneel before sunrise, pressing his hand to the trough boards, as if he could hear something moving beneath them. The box had Thomas's knife mark on the latch. Inside lay a folded map, 3 land deeds, and a strip of blue survey ribbon wrapped around a brass valve key. Across the map, in Thomas's careful hand, were 2 words Mara had not heard since the day they buried him. Reservoir line. Thomas had not died chasing a dream. Someone had buried the proof. Before Mara could fold the map back, Ledger raised his head toward the ridge road and gave one low warning growl. A buggy was coming fast from town. Mara saw the black coat first. Then the Crowther Bank seal stamped on the leather satchel beside the driver. If Crowther Bank found that key in her hand, they would not only take Ridgefall Ranch, they would bury Thomas Bell a second time. Mara slid the brass valve key into the pocket of her apron before the buggy reached the yard. The tin box she pushed behind a broken feed barrel, beneath a burlap sack that had once held flour. Ledger tried to rise when the wheels rattled past the gate, but his bad leg folded under him. Mara placed one hand on his neck and felt the hard flutter of his breath. "Stay," she whispered. Ledger stayed because he could not stand. The buggy stopped beside the windmill. Elias Crowther stepped down carefully, as if even the dirt of Ridgefall Ranch ought to know better than to cling to his boots. He wore a black coat despite the heat, and carried no gun where a person could see it. "Mrs. Bell," he said, touching 2 fingers to his hat. "I hope I am not intruding." Mara stood between him and the trough. "Bank business usually comes through the post. When the matter is small, yes." Crowther looked toward the cracked pens and pale grass beyond them. "But hardship deserves courtesy." The word sat between them like a hand laid over a mouth. Ridgefall had cost Mara $75 at county sale, with 22 paid down from the last coins Thomas had left in a coffee tin. The rest had become notes, fees, signatures, and polite warnings. 21 days remained before the final payment. $43.70. She knew the number better than the lines in her own palm. Crowther knew it too. He opened his leather satchel and removed a folded document. "I have reviewed your account. There may be a cleaner way to settle this before the deadline turns unfriendly." "Clean for who?" His smile did not move much. "For a woman alone. That is all I meant." Ledger made a low sound from the dust. Crowther's eyes lowered. Poor old thing. Thomas would hardly recognize him now. Thomas would know his own dog, Mara said. Perhaps. Crowther glanced at the scratched boards of the trough. Has he been worrying at the wood? Old dogs worry at many things. So do grieving people. The windmill clicked above them, one slow iron complaint after another. "I came to make an offer," he said. "Crowther Bank will take Ridgefall back for the remainder of your obligation and add $18 cash. Enough for passage east, or a room in town while you find work. No shame in stepping clear of a mistake before it swallows you." The offer was not mercy. It was hunger with gloves on. Behind Mara, Ledger dragged himself closer to the trough. His claws scraped the dirt. Crowther looked not at the dog, but at the place where the bottom board had lifted. "Windmill stock rots fast in this country," he said. "If you start prying at old boards, you may find nothing worth the splinters." Mara kept her hands folded in front of her apron pocket, the brass key pressed cold against her thigh. "I did not ask for repairs." "No," Crowther said. But Thomas often confused repair with revelation. He paid Jonas Reed twice to open pipe housings and trough beds that any sensible man would have left alone. It was the first time Mara had heard Jonas Reed's name connected to the trough. Jonas was the windmill man, quiet and narrow-shouldered, with hands stained by grease. He had been at Thomas's funeral, standing near the back with his hat crushed in both hands. Mara stored the name away. Crowther extended the paper. Think on it. I would rather see you leave with dignity than be removed by order. Deputy Pike's order? County order, Crowther corrected. Harlan Pike only serves it. Ledger barked once. It came out broken, more cough than warning, but Crowther stepped back as if the sound had touched a nerve. That dog is suffering, he said. A merciful woman would consider ending it before confusion makes him dangerous. Mara took the paper and folded it without looking. A merciful town would have said that to hungry men before the bank took their cattle. For the first time, the smile left Crowther's face, only for a breath. Then it returned, thinner and better made. Pride left Thomas alone in the flats, he said. I would hate to see it leave you the same inheritance. He climbed into the buggy and drove back toward the ridge road. Even his departure had manners. Mara waited until the buggy disappeared beyond the mesquite before she let her knees weaken. Ledger laid his head against her boot. She knelt and pressed her fingers into the fur behind his ear, where Thomas used to scratch him after a long day. You knew he would come, she whispered. Ledger's eyes stayed on the trough. Inside the house, Mara barred the door with the axe handle Thomas had shaped in their first winter. She set the tin box on the table and spread its contents beside Crowther's offer. The map was older than she had first thought, drawn on survey paper browned at the folds. Ridgefall was marked in Thomas's hand, but two neighboring ranches were marked too, Ren Creek and Little Ox. A blue line ran beneath all three, bending as if it followed something alive under the earth. Beside the line, Thomas had written numbers, R17, R18, R21. The deeds looked official enough to frighten her. Stamps, seals, county words, dates written in uneven ink. Mara could mend a ripped saddle skirt by lantern light, but law paper made her feel like a child listening at a closed door. Then she saw one thing she understood. Thomas Bell's signature appeared on the top deed. The same signature appeared below it. The first was strong and slanted right. The second looked nearly the same, except the final L in Bell curled backward. Thomas had never curled that letter backward in his life. A soft scrape came from outside. Ledger was no longer by the hearth. Mara found the back door nudged open and followed the drag marks of his bad leg into the yard. The old dog had returned to the windmill, but he was not at the trough now. He stood beneath the pump housing, shaking so hard his ribs moved like loose barrel hoops. Between his front paws lay a small plug of blackened iron he had pulled from the dust. Stamped into its side was a mark Mara had seen only once before that day. Crowther Bank and Trust. Mara did not touch the iron plug at first. It lay between Ledger's paws, black with old grease, pale mineral crust caught in the threads. The stamp on its side was small, but the letters were clean. Crowther Bank and Trust. A bank had no honest reason to mark a piece of pipe hidden under a widow's windmill. Ledger nudged it toward her boot. All right, Mara whispered. I see it. She wrapped the plug in flour sack cloth and crouched beneath the pump housing. The open joint behind it was scraped bright at the rim. A narrow pipe ran west under the hard pan, angled toward the dry run beyond the pasture. Mara poured a little basin water into the pipe. It backed up at once, dark with grit, and spilled over her fingers. The line was not dry. It was choked. Ledger watched the water spill, ears lifted, then turned his muzzle toward the west pasture. He tried to stand, but his bad legs shook beneath him. Mara saw the need in his eyes and the weakness in his body. For one moment, she nearly followed where he pointed. Then he coughed, so hard his ribs pulled tight under his coat. No, she said softly. Not today. The old dog stared at her, offended and exhausted. She guided him to the porch shade and set clean kitchen water by his nose. Away from the windmill trough, he drank 3 shallow laps. That told Mara more than any town man had told her in 3 years. Inside, she hid the tin box beneath the loose floorboard under her bed. She carried only 3 things: the iron plug, the brass valve key, and Crowther's folded offer. The map stayed behind. If Deputy Pike stopped her on the road, paper could be called stolen. Iron could still pass for junk if she lied calmly enough. Before leaving, she checked the offer again. Crowther's neat hand had written the sum beneath the printed terms. $18 cash. After surrender of claim. Not sale. Surrender. The word made Ridgefall sound like a fort already defeated. Mara folded the paper smaller and put it next to the valve key. Mercy Fork sat 3 miles east, sun-baked and narrow, with false fronts faded by wind. Men outside the feed store watched her cross the street. One of them glanced at the cloth bundle in her hand, then found sudden interest in his tobacco. Mara kept walking. Jonas Reed's windmill shop stood behind the livery, crowded with pipe lengths, wagon rims, bent vanes, and one pump frame hanging from a chain like a rib cage. The bell over the door gave no sound when she entered. The room smelled of hot metal, oil, old rope, and fear. Jonas was filing teeth into a gear wheel at the back. He was thinner than he had been at Thomas's funeral, with grease in the cracks of his hands and eyes that would not hold still. When he saw Mara, the file slipped. "Mrs. Bell, Mr. Reed, if this is about Ridgefall, I told Mr. Crowther that Mill was not worth raising. I did not come from Mr. Crowther. That should have eased him." It did not. Mara unwrapped the plug on his workbench. Jonas went still. He did not ask where she found it. He did not touch it. His silence gave her the answer before his mouth could shape a lie. "You know what this is," she said. "I know pipe fittings." "That is not what I asked." He looked toward the door. "You should not have brought that here." "Because it proves something?" "Because it brings men who do not knock." Outside, a horse stamped in the livery yard. Jonas flinched. Mara had walked there ready to hate him. Crowther had named him. Thomas had used him. The trough had been opened by his hands. But Jonas Reed did not look like a man guarding profit. He looked like a man who had been living under a boot for a long time. "You opened the trough the night Thomas died," Mara said. His face tightened. "Who told you?" "Crowther." Jonas gave a dry laugh. "Of course he did. Did you open it?" "Yes." The word struck like a hammer on bone. Mara gripped the edge of the bench. Ledger had scratched the right boards. Thomas had touched the right place. The secret had a human hand in it now, and that hand stood before her with oil on its sleeves. "Why?" Jonas removed his cap and twisted it once. "Because Thomas asked me to." Mara did not speak. "He came after dark," Jonas said. "Had drawings in his coat and mud up to his knees. Said the trough bottom had been worked before he ever bought Ridgefall. Said the pump line ran wrong for land everybody called dry. He wanted it opened quiet. I told him no. He gave me $6 and a saddle buckle your husband had no business parting with. The buckle had been brass. With a chipped corner from the winter, Thomas broke a young mare. Mara remembered polishing it with ash and vinegar. What did he find? An empty space under the boards. No box then, only room for one. He measured it, cursed once, then started asking about the west line. Mara set the plug upright. "Was this there?" Jonas shook his head. "Not that night." "Then when?" "After the funeral." The shop seemed to shrink around the answer. Jonas lowered his voice. "2 mornings after they buried Thomas, a wagon stood at Ridgefall. Not mine. Crowther's men had me replace 3 boards on the trough and keep my questions in my teeth. My boy owed the bank $31 for a doctor who could not save his wife. I did what a coward does when the debt has his son's name on it. You helped them bury my husband's proof. I helped them keep my son out of debtor's jail." The answer did not pardon him. It only made the sin heavier, because Mara could understand the shape of it. Jonas reached beneath the bench and drew out a folded scrap of survey paper, soft at the creases. He held it close to his chest. "Thomas left this behind. Or meant to. I never decided which." Mara saw a blue line, 2 numbers, and half a word at the fold. "Reserve." Her breath caught. "Give it to me. If I do, I lose what little safety I bought." "You never bought safety," Mara said. "You bought delay." Jonas looked at her then, and shame passed over his face like cloud shadow. Slowly, he extended the paper. Wheels rolled to a stop outside. Jonas pulled the scrap back. A shadow crossed the doorway, broad and steady. Deputy Harlan Pike did not enter at once. He stood in the sun with one thumb hooked in his belt, as if the whole street belonged to his patience. Behind him, a second man waited by the horses, with a black leather satchel hanging from one hand. "Mrs. Bell," Pike called. "Mr. Crowther says you may be carrying property that does not belong to you." Mara closed her fingers around the iron plug. Behind Jonas's workbench, the folded survey scrap disappeared into his fist. Deputy Harlan Pike stepped into Jonas Reed's shop without removing his hat. The room seemed smaller with him inside. Pike was not a large man, but he carried the county's authority the way some men carried a rifle, resting one hand near it so everyone remembered it was there. The man behind him remained outside, half in sun, half in shadow, Crowther's black leather satchel hanging from his fist. Pike looked first at Mara, then at the workbench. "That bundle in your hand," he said. "Set it down." Mara kept the iron plug wrapped in cloth. On what charge? No charge. A question of rightful ownership. Then ask the question. Pike's eyes narrowed a little. He preferred fear to grammar. Mr. Crowther reports that materials belonging to a bank-held property may have been removed from Ridgefall Ranch. Ridgefall is not bank-held. Payment remains incomplete. That makes me indebted. It does not make me dead. Jonas stared at the floorboards as if a nail there had become urgent. In his right fist, the survey scrap was hidden badly. Pike saw the hand. Mara saw Pike see it. "What are you holding, Reed?" Jonas's mouth opened, but no answer came. Mara stepped sideways, drawing Pike's attention back to her. "A pipe plug was under my pump housing. If Crowther wants it, he can explain why his bank seal is stamped on buried iron." Pike held out his hand. "I will take it to the office and ask him." "That is not an answer. It is the only one you are getting in town." The man with the satchel shifted outside. Metal clicked inside the leather, small and quick, like keys or instruments. Mara thought of the brass valve key in her pocket and kept still. Pike moved closer. "Mrs. Bell, I have been patient because grief makes people bold in foolish ways. Do not make me write this different." He reached for the bundle. Mara let him take it. Jonas looked up, startled. Pike seemed almost disappointed by the lack of struggle. He unwrapped the plug and studied the stamp. For the first time, something uncertain touched his face. "That could have come from anywhere," he said. "Then why did Crowther send you before I showed it to anyone?" Pike folded the cloth again, tighter. "Because widows with debts sometimes invent stories to delay lawful collection." There it was. The town's verdict, dressed in county words. Mara felt the sting of it, but she also saw Jonas's fist loosen behind the bench. A corner of blue line showed between his fingers. Pike turned on him. "Reed." Jonas flinched. "Anything to add?" The windmill man swallowed. His eyes moved to Mara, then to the satchel outside. Whatever courage had started in him thinned fast. Only that old fittings turn up around old mills. Mara's chest tightened. "Jonas." He would not look at her. Pike nodded, satisfied. "Sensible." The deputy tucked the plug beneath his arm. "Mrs. Bell, you will return to Ridgefall and stay there unless called. If you go troubling Mr. Crowther's name around town, I can hold you for slander, disturbance, or theft, depending on how generous I feel. Law has become a flexible thing in Mercy Fork. It bends less than poor people think." The answer came softly, almost kindly. That made it worse. Pike stepped back into the yard. The man with the satchel opened it just enough for Mara to see paper packets inside, tied in red string, bank papers or something made to look like them. Pike passed him the plug. The man slid it into the satchel and buckled it shut. Mara had lost the only hard iron proof she had carried. Pike mounted and rode toward the main street. The satchel man followed, without a word. When their horses turned the corner, Jonas shut the shop door and dropped the bar. His face had gone gray. "You should leave," he said. "You lied. I survived. You let him take it. You let him take it first." Mara had no answer for that. She had let Pike have the plug because she could not let him search her pockets and find the brass key. Still, the loss burned. Jonas opened his fist. The survey scrap lay damp against his palm, creased around his fear. "I could not give it with Pike watching," he said. Mara took it before he changed his mind. The paper was no larger than her hand. It showed the west edge of Ridgefall and a blue line bending under a mark labeled R17. Beside it, Thomas had written, "Old valve below Salt Cedar, 8 paces north of Splitstone." At the lower corner, another name had been cut off by a tear. "Ren Creek," Mara said. Jonas nodded. "Ada Wren's place. Her husband found a line too, sold after the well failed, died winter after." "Crowther?" Jonas looked toward the barred door. "I never saw him dirty his hands. Men like that buy clean gloves. Who tore this?" "I did." The confession came quick enough to hurt. Mara folded the scrap slowly. "Why?" "Because Thomas wrote 3 ranch names on it. Ridgefall, Ren Creek, Little Ox. I tore off the other 2 when Pike came asking after the funeral. I thought if I kept only a piece, no one could hang me with all of it." "And the missing piece?" Jonas rubbed his eyes with thumb and forefinger. "Ada Wren may have it. Her husband kept papers under the flour bin. She lives beyond the old wash now, in that 2-room place with the red door." Mara remembered Ada Wren as a woman who never entered church, until the hymn had started, and always left before the last amen. A woman who looked at bankers the way some people looked at snakes in tall grass. "Why tell me now?" Jonas leaned against the bench. Because your dog found the plug. That does not sound like a reason. It is the only reason that scares me worse than Crowther. He looked at the floor, voice lowering. Thomas said, if Ledger ever went back to that trough after he was gone, it meant the line had been sealed again. He said the dog knew the smell of good water. I laughed at him. Mara did not. Outside, the town bell struck noon. Each note came through the shop wall dull and hot. Jonas lifted a short-handled wrench from beneath the bench and offered it to her. If you find the old valve, do not turn it bare-handed. It may be wired. Crowther's men set spring traps for coyotes along pipe runs. A widow's hand would fit in one easy enough. Mara took the wrench. You could come with me. Jonas shook his head. If I leave this shop now, Pike will know I gave you something. So you are still afraid? Yes, he said. But I am less proud of it than I was yesterday. That was not courage. It was a beginning too small to trust, but too useful to throw away. Mara left through the back, crossing behind the livery and down an alley that smelled of hay rot and warm manure. She kept the survey scrap inside her bodice, the valve key in her apron, and Jonas's wrench beneath her shawl. By the time she reached Ridgefall, the afternoon had turned white with heat. Ledger was no longer in the porch shade. Panic took her across the yard. She found him at the edge of the west pasture, collapsed beside a crooked salt cedar, his muzzle pressed to the dirt below its roots. Beside him stood a split stone, half buried in dust. 8 paces north, the ground had been freshly disturbed. The fresh dirt beside the salt cedar was darker than the ground around it. Mara knelt carefully, keeping one hand on Ledger's side, until she felt the shallow rise and fall of his breathing. The old dog had spent what little strength he had crossing the west pasture alone. Burrs clung to the fur along his belly. Dust had caked wet at the corners of his mouth. Still, his eyes stayed fixed on the disturbed earth beneath the twisted roots. You stubborn old sinner, Mara whispered. Ledger gave the smallest thump of his tail. The split stone stood 8 paces south, just as Thomas had written. Mara measured the distance twice, first with her boots, then with her eyes. The hole beside the cedar had not been made by an animal. Its sides were too clean. The loose soil had been pushed back with a shovel and pressed down again in a hurry. Someone had come here after the trough gave up its secret. Maybe after Crowther's buggy left. Maybe while Mara was in town. She pulled Jonas Reed's short-handled wrench from beneath her shawl and used it to scrape away the top layer. 3 inches down, the wrench struck iron. Mara stopped breathing until she understood what she had hit. Not the valve. A trap. 2 black jaws snapped shut around the wrench handle, with a crack sharp enough to make Ledger jerk his head up. Mara fell back hard, pain flashing through her wrist. If she had used her fingers instead of Jonas's tool, the trap would have broken them to the bone. Ledger growled, low and sick. I know, Mara said, though her voice shook. I know. The trap was small, meant for coyote or fox, but it had been set in a place no animal would naturally dig. Beneath one jaw, nearly hidden by dirt, lay a chip of blue paint. Mara worked it free with a stick. It was not paint at all, but a shaved piece of survey ribbon, hardened by mud. Blue, like the ribbon in Thomas's tin box. She freed the wrench, pried the trap loose, and kept digging with more care. Below the trap was a round iron collar set into the ground. The valve socket was empty. Someone had removed the stem, leaving only the threaded mouth and the smell of cold mineral damp rising from below. Mara lowered her face close. There was water down there. Not enough to hear, not enough to see, but enough to smell like stone after rain. The scent moved through her chest with such force that she had to close her eyes. Thomas had not dreamed it. Ledger had not imagined it. Ridgefall had a throat, and someone had taken away the handle that opened it. She drew the brass valve key from her pocket and tried it against the socket. It fit the shape, but without the missing stem there was nothing for it to turn. Crowther had left her a key to a door with the hinge stolen. Mara sat back on her heels, anger gathering where fear had been. This was not a mistake in paperwork. This was labor. Men had dug here. Men had sealed pipe, set traps, removed parts, and put the dirt back smooth. A dead ranch did not need that much killing. Ledger tried to rise again. No, this time she did not soften the word. You have done enough. She carried him as far as the porch in 3 broken stretches, stopping twice when her arms shook. Ledger was not large anymore, but exhaustion made him heavy. She laid him in the shade, washed his paws, and found one pad torn raw from the pasture stones. He watched her bandage it with a strip from Thomas's old shirt. You are not coming to Ren Creek, she told him. His ears moved at the name. Mara froze. You know that place too? Ledger's eyes did not leave hers. By late afternoon, Mara had tied the trap in a grain sack and hidden the brass key under the hearthstone. She took only the survey scrap, Crowther's offer, and the chip of blue ribbon. Then she walked north along the dry wash toward Ada Wren's place. Ada lived in a 2-room house with a red door sun-faded to the color of old blood. No fence stood around it. No chickens scratched in the yard. A woman who had lost land often lost the habit of keeping things that needed ground. Ada opened the door before Mara knocked. She was older than Mara by 15 years, narrow as a fence rail, with gray hair pinned tight and eyes that had learned to measure danger before courtesy. She looked at Mara's dusty dress, then at the folded paper in her hand. I wondered when Thomas Bell's trouble would find you, Ada said. Mara had planned a softer opening. The words left her. You knew? I knew enough to be afraid of knowing more. Ada let herin. The room smelled of coffee boiled too many times and lavender hung to dry. On the table sat a flour bin with no flour in it. Ada saw Mara notice it and gave a humorless smile. Jonas told you. He told me your husband had papers. My husband had hope. Papers were what got him punished for it. Ada lifted the flour bin and pulled loose a board beneath it. From the space below, she removed a strip of oilcloth tied with thread. Her hands were steady until she laid it on the table. My Samuel found water first, she said. Not a well full, not a creek reborn, but pressure in the old line under Ren Creek. He thought Crowther would pay fair if the land had value. He still believed fair was a thing men did when witnesses were present. What happened? Crowther praised his diligence. Deputy Pike came 2 days later with a lien Samuel had never seen. By the end of the month, Ren Creek belonged to the bank. By winter, Samuel belonged to the cemetery. Mara unfolded Jonas's scrap and laid it beside Ada's oilcloth. Ada opened her bundle. The 2 pieces of survey paper nearly matched. Nearly. A blue line ran from Ridgefall through Ren Creek and bent south toward Little Ox. The numbers were not ranch marks. They were not ownership lots. They were stations along one buried water line. R17, R18, R21, R24. Beside each number, Thomas and Samuel had written pressure notes, valve marks, and dates. Mara saw the truth widen past her own grief. Ridgefall had never been the prize by itself. It was one mouth, on a hidden vein. They called them failed wells, Mara said. Ada touched the paper. They were sealed valves. The room went still around those words. Turned that way, the whole county changed shape. Every poor ranch Crowther had bought after a sudden drought. Every widow told her husband had mismanaged land. Every family that left with wagons half empty because the bank had declared their acres worthless. Not bad luck. Not dry years alone. A line buried under them all, closed piece by piece until desperation did the selling. Mara looked again at the map. A torn edge ran through the lower corner. Where's the rest? Ada's face closed. I thought you had it. No. Ada stood so fast, her chair scraped the floor. She went back to the floor space beneath the flour bin, then to a tin trunk beside the bed. Blankets came out. A cracked photograph. A child's shoe. Letters tied in faded string. No map. Her breathing changed. It was here, she said. When? This morning. Mara felt the trap snap again in her memory. Ada turned slowly toward the red door. A peddler came by before noon. Asked for water, though he carried a full canteen. I never let him pass the threshold. Did he see the flour bin? He saw me look at it. Outside, a wagon creaked somewhere beyond the wash. Too far to see, close enough to hear. Ada gathered the 2 remaining map pieces and pressed them into Mara's hands. Take them. If Crowther has the missing piece, he knows which ranch comes next. Mara looked down at the torn blue line. At the very edge, half a name remained. Little. Ada Wren shut the red door and slid the bolt across it. The sound was small, but it changed the room. Outside, the dry wash lay bright under the lowering sun. Inside, Mara stood over the torn map pieces, with the name, Little, cut open at the edge like a wound. Little Ox, Ada said. The Calder place. 70 acres, 6 milk cows, 2 boys, and an old stone marker with an ox shoe nailed to it. Crowther took it 18 months after Ren Creek. Are the Calders still here? Gone to Kansas, if that story was true. Ada's mouth tightened. Families who lose land often name faraway places so neighbors stop asking where they sleep. Mara looked at the blue line crossing the papers. Ridgefall, Ren Creek, Little Ox. 3 ranches tied by the same buried vein. 3 families told their wells had failed. 3 losses made to look like poor judgment instead of theft. The numbers beside the line were not ranch lots. They looked like stations on something built, measured, and hidden with care. Ada moved to the cold stove and reached behind a loose brick. When her hand came back, she held a narrow envelope, browned at the corners. On the front, in Thomas Bell's hand, was Mara's name. Beneath it were 4 words. When water answers first. Mara did not take it right away. Thomas's handwriting still leaned forward, quick and familiar, as if he had only stepped outside and expected her to understand when he returned. When did he leave this? The week before he died, Ada said. He came after midnight with Ledger beside him. Samuel was already buried by then. I told Thomas to go home. He said home was why he could not. Mara broke the old wax and unfolded the letter. Mara, if this reaches you, then I failed to bring proof home clean. Do not think I kept you outside because I doubted your courage. I kept you outside because Crowther cannot punish what he cannot prove, you know. He has paper enough to make truth look like trespass, theft, or madness, and enough friends to make the town believe it. Ledger knows more of the line than any man will believe. I walked him from Ridgefall Trough to the Salt Cedar, from Ren Creek's Red Door to the Little Ox Marker, until the poor old fellow hated me for it. He knows the smell of good water and the iron they use to choke it. If I do not come back, trust the dog when people make you doubt yourself. Forgive me for making silence look like distance. De. Mara read it twice before the words stopped moving. For 3 years, she had carried one bitterness she never said aloud. Thomas had spent his final months leaving before dawn, returning after dark, washing mud from his sleeves before she could ask where he had been. When she questioned him, he gave tired answers about fence lines and repairs. She had thought he was shutting her out because grief or pride had already claimed him. Now the silence changed shape. It had not been mistrust. It had been protection, clumsy and wrong, but real. Thomas had walked ahead of her because he feared Crowther would crush her before the truth could stand. He had left her debt, shame, and a failing dog with a burden no animal should have carried. Yet he had also left a trail, and he had trusted her enough to follow it when no one else would. He should have told me, Mara said. Yes, Ada answered. I would have helped. Yes, I might have died with him. Ada looked toward the shuttered window. That was his fear. The answer hurt because it was honest. Mara wanted one clean feeling, anger or love, forgiveness or blame. Instead, she had all of them at once, crowded inside her like people waiting outside a courthouse door. She folded the letter and placed it inside her bodice with the survey scraps. The paper rested against her ribs, like a second heartbeat. Where is the Little Ox Marker? Ada hesitated. South of the old cattle lane, stone post, ox shoe nailed in front. But if Crowther's man took the missing map piece, he knows it too. Then we are late already. Ada lifted an old shotgun from behind a flour barrel. The barrel was dull, the stock bound with twine where it had split. Will it fire? Mara asked. Once, maybe twice. That is not much comfort. It is more than a widow usually gets. They left by the back path, cutting through the wash where mesquite roots held the sand in hard ridges. The sun had lowered, but the ground still gave back heat through their boot soles. Ada moved quickly despite her stiff knee. Mara carried Jonas's wrench under her shawl and the brass valve key deep in her apron pocket. Thomas's letter seemed to burn against her chest with every step. Half a mile from Little Ox, Ada stopped and raised one hand. Fresh wagon tracks crossed the wash. They cut deep near a dry seep where the soil still held dampness under the crust. 2 horses had pulled weight. One wheel had a broken rim edge that left a repeating crescent in the dust. Near the track, Mara found a crushed twist of tobacco paper, the same red-striped kind she had seen tucked in the hatband of the man with Crowther's satchel. The peddler? Mara asked. Ada touched the track and rubbed the dirt between finger and thumb. A peddler leaving my door would not drive heavier than when he came. They followed the tracks along the cattle lane until the land opened into what had once been Little Ox. The house still stood, but one wall leaned inward. The porch sagged at the middle. The yard pump had no handle, only a rusted socket where one had been cut off. A child's swing hung from a cottonwood branch, turning slowly in the hot breeze. Mara thought of the Calder boys Ada had mentioned. She pictured them roping fence posts before the bank taught them how quickly a home could become someone else's document. At the south corner stood the marker. It was a stone post sunk deep in hardpan, with an ox shoe nailed to the face. The ground around it had been disturbed recently, not carefully. Whoever came had been in a hurry, and confident no one would arrive in time. Ada kept watch while Mara dug with Jonas's wrench. 6 inches down, she found a hollow lined with flat stones. Inside lay only scraps, a torn corner of oilcloth, a length of blue survey ribbon, and one brass screw marked by a fresh tool scar. Whatever had been hidden there was gone. The hollow smelled faintly of oil, iron, and cold earth, as if something sealed had been opened only hours earlier. Mara sifted the dirt again. Her fingers found a sliver of paper wedged beneath the lowest stone. It was no larger than a matchbook cover, but Thomas's pencil crossed it in hurried strokes. Auction before rain. Beneath the words was a number. Ada went pale. County land auction is Saturday. 3 days, Mara said. Crowther posted notices last week. I thought it was only tax land and old parcels. Mara looked at the empty hollow, then at the wagon tracks leaving Little Ox. They did not turn west toward the open road. They bent north, toward Mercy Fork. The missing proof was not buried anymore. It was headed to town, where Crowther could lock it in a drawer, burn it, or turn it into paper that said the opposite of truth before anyone knew what had been stolen. Mara and Ada did not follow the wagon tracks all the way into Mercy Fork. They followed them far enough to know the direction, then cut east through the brush before the road rose toward town. Ada said a woman with a shotgun and a widow with dirt on her sleeves would not look like travelers by the time they reached Main Street. They would look like trouble already named. The sun had dropped behind the ridges when Mara came within sight of Ridgefall. Something was wrong before she saw the house. Ledger was barking. Not the broken cough he had given Crowther in the yard. Not the worn warning of an old dog guarding a porch. This was a raw, tearing sound, dragged out of a chest that did not have enough breath to spare. Mararan. The front door stood open. The axe handle she had used as a bar lay split on the threshold. Drawers had been pulled out. Flour, thread, coffee grounds, and Thomas's old receipts were scattered across the floor. The loose board beneath the bed had been lifted. The tin box was gone. Ledger stood in the corner of the room, legs braced wide, muzzle wet with blood that was not all his. A man in a dust coat crouched near the bed with one hand clamped around his wrist. The same red-striped tobacco paper Mara had found at Little Ox was tucked in his hatband. When he saw Ada's shotgun, he stopped trying to rise. "Who sent you?" Mara asked. The man spat blood on her floor. "Nobody sends a man to collect abandoned property." Ledger staggered and nearly fell. Mara caught him before his bad hip struck the boards. His heart hammered against her arm. A shallow cut marked his shoulder, where a knife had shaved through fur and skin. Ada kept the shotgun steady. "He cut that dog." The man looked at Ledger with more fear than shame. "Dog bit first." "Good," Ada said. Mara saw the empty space beneath the bed and felt something in her harden. The map pieces Ada had given her were still against her ribs. Thomas's letter was there too. But the deeds from the tin box, the survey ribbon, the marked latch, the proof Thomas had hidden for her, Crowther had taken almost all of it without asking a judge for permission. Outside, hoofbeats sounded on the yard road. Deputy Pike arrived with 2 riders and a lantern swinging from his saddle horn. He took in the broken door, the injured dog, the man on the floor, and Ada's shotgun. His face showed no surprise. "Put the gun down, Mrs. Ren." Ada did not move. He was inside her house. Mr. Voss here was recovering property reported stolen from Crowther Bank. Mara stared at him. "He broke my door." Locks break when lawful entry is resisted. There was no warrant. Pike looked around at the room. "Mrs. Bell, you are standing on land still under lien. Property disputes get complicated." The words were smooth enough to choke on. Voss rose when Pike nodded. Ledger growled and tried to lunge, but his legs failed. Mara held him tight. Voss smiled then, showing a split lip. "Old Kerr ain't got much left." Mara felt Ledger's body tremble in her arms. Not fear. Effort. Pike held out his hand. "Any papers removed from the tin box will come with me." "I do not have them." "Then you will not object to a search." Ada lifted the shotgun a quarter inch. Pike's eyes cooled. "That would make this easier for Mr. Crowther." Mara understood. If Ada fired, Crowther would have all he needed. Hysterical widows, stolen bank property, an injured hired man, and a dead deputy if luck went wrong. The truth could be buried under one foolish minute. She nodded to Ada. The shotgun lowered. Pike searched the kitchen, the trunk, the bed ticking, the pockets of Mara's spare dress. One rider found Jonas's wrench beneath her shawl and took it. Another found the chip of blue ribbon and the scrap from Little Ox in her apron. Pike studied the sliver with Thomas's words auction before rain and folded it into his coat. He did not find the letter. He did not search beneath the torn lining of Mara's bodice, where Ada had shoved the 2 map pieces while Pike was watching the gun. Pike stopped before leaving. Stay away from the auction. Saturday. Mr. Crowther has been more patient than most men would be. Most thieves grow impatient near the end, Mara said. For once, Pike looked tired. You think this is bravery. It may only be a widow choosing who gets hurt beside her. His gaze dropped to Ledger. Then he left with Voss, the wrench, the paper sliver, the blue ribbon, and the last clean piece of Mara's caution. Ada closed what remained of the door after them. We should go to town tonight. Wake the newspaper man. Wake the preacher. Wake anybody. With what? Mara asked. A story? 2 torn map pieces? A letter from a dead man telling me to trust a dog? Ada had no answer. Ledger gave one low whine. He had crawled from Mara's lap to the open doorway. Blood had dried along his shoulder. One paw was still wrapped in Thomas's old shirt. His head was lifted toward the west pasture. No, Mara said. Ledger pulled himself forward. Ledger, no. He did not stop. Ada watched the old dog drag himself into the moonlit yard. Mara, I know. He will die out there. Mara went to him and knelt in the dust. Ledger pressed his nose against her palm, then turned again toward the west. Not the salt cedar this time. Farther south, toward the dry run where the land dropped through stone and mesquite. Thomas's letter seemed to warm against her skin. Trust the dog when people make you doubt yourself. Mara wrapped Ledger's shoulder with a cleaner strip, took the brass valve key from under the hearthstone, and lifted him into the wheelbarrow Thomas had once used for fence posts. Ledger hated it, but he no longer had strength to argue. Ada took the lantern. If we are following a dying dog, we may as well see where he is taking us. They crossed the west pasture under a thin moon. Twice Ledger tried to climb out. Twice Mara stopped and let him point with his muzzle. At the dry run, he whined until she pushed the wheelbarrow down a narrow cattle path hidden by salt grass. At the bottom, stone held the day's heat. Mesquite branches scratched Mara's arms. The lantern showed nothing but rock, sand, and the white bones of old roots, until Ledger raised his head and barked once. Ahead, a patch of reeds grew where no reeds should have lived. Ada lifted the lantern higher. Water shone black at their roots. Not a spring wide enough to save a ranch. Not yet. Only a thin seep sliding from beneath a flat stone, gathering in a hollow no bigger than a wash basin. Beside it, half buried in silt, was an iron inspection plate bolted into the earth. On the plate, under rust and mud, were stamped 3 letters. T. L. O. County Land Office. Mara fitted the brass valve key into a narrow slot near the edge. This time it caught. She turned it 1 careful inch. Below them, something knocked inside the ground. Then came a sound Mara had not heard at Ridgefall in 3 years. Water moving through pipe. Mara did not turn the valve farther. The knock beneath the ground had already said enough. Water was moving where Crowther had sworn no water lived, and the sound of it traveled through the pipe like a voice waking after a long burial. Ada stood with the lantern held high, her face pale in the yellow light. Can we open it? Not here, Mara said. The words cost her. Every part of her wanted to turn the key, until water broke loose from the hidden line and proved Thomas right to the whole dark prairie. But 1 wash basin seep and a pipe under stone would not survive Crowther's mouth in a public room. He would call it runoff. He would call it a natural pocket. He would call Mara a trespasser who had damaged county works. Truth, by itself, was not enough. It needed witnesses before men with clean gloves touched it. Ledger lay against the wheelbarrow frame, eyes half closed, listening. When the water knocked again, his tail moved once. Mara knelt beside him. You brought us this far. Now I have to bring people to it. By dawn, she had not slept. She and Ada made a charcoal rubbing of the inspection plate on the back of Crowther's surrender offer. The letters CLO came up clear, along with a stamped number, half hidden by rust, 1880, 1 to 24. They copied the visible part of the valve collar, the mark on the plate, and the station numbers from Thomas's torn map. Mara sealed one copy inside an envelope addressed to the county land office in Abilene County, the office Thomas had written to, but never reached. The second copy she folded into the lining of Ledger's old collar. Ledger objected to the handling, though he could barely lift his head. Mara took that as a good sign because it meant there was still some insult left in him. At mid-morning, she went to Jonas Reed. He opened the shop door, with a revolver in his hand, and shame in his eyes. "You should not be here. You told me where to find a dead valve." I found a live county plate. That changed him, not all at once. Fear held its place, but something behind it straightened. Mara laid the rubbing on his bench. Jonas stared at the number. CLO station plate. Old Waterworks survey. I saw one like it near Little Ox before Calder lost the place. Will you say that Saturday? His hand closed around the edge of the bench. Crowther will ruin my boy. Crowther already owns your fear. What more is left for him to buy? Jonas looked away. Mara softened her voice because anger could only push a frightened man so far. Thomas paid you $6 and a saddle buckle. Samuel Wren hid papers under a flour bin. Calder buried something beneath an ox shoe. All of them trusted someone would stand where they could not. I am asking you to stand in a room, not in front of a gun. Jonas gave a tired laugh. You think rooms cannot kill? I think silence has been killing us longer. He turned the rubbing toward the light. If I speak, Pike will call me a debtor trying to escape what I owe. Then bring your account book. Show what you owed before your son's doctor bill and what Crowther added after. Jonas went still. You kept records, Mara said. Every man who has been cheated keeps records he is too afraid to show. He did not answer, but he reached beneath the counter and pulled out a narrow ledger wrapped in oilcloth. The cover was cracked. The pages smelled of dust and machine grease. Inside were dates, amounts, repair orders, and one entry written 3 days after Thomas's funeral. Replace trough boards and seal west service joint. Paid by CBT. Account. No customer signature. Mara looked at the initials. Crowther Bank and Trust. Jonas shut the book before she could read more. This does not leave my hand, then your hand comes with it. He looked toward the street. Pike was not there, but his absence had weight. Saturday, Jonas said at last. Not before. It was not enough. It was the beginning of enough. They found the stage driver at the depot, loading mail sacks under the watch of 2 railroad clerks. His name was Tom Vale, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his chin, and no love for Crowther since the bank had taken his brother's hayfield. Mara gave him the sealed envelope, and 2 silver dimes Ada had pressed into her palm. Vale weighed the envelope. Abilene County Land Office? Yes. Crowther sees me carry this. He will ask why. Then tell him widows still write letters. Vale tucked it inside the mail pouch, beneath a packet of seed catalogs. If anyone asks, it left on the noon stage. If trouble asks, it left yesterday. That was the closest thing to official help Mara had yet touched. By Friday evening, the town had begun to feel the storm before the rain. Auction notices were nailed to the courthouse wall, the feed store, and the depot post. Tax parcels, abandoned claims, bank-recovered acreage. Ridgefall appeared in small print under provisional sale. Ren Creek and Little Ox appeared under consolidated holdings, a phrase clean enough to hide blood. Crowther saw Mara reading the notice. He approached without haste. Black coat brushed clean, hat brim low against the sun. You have had a trying week, Mrs. Bell, so have your locks. His smile stayed in place. I heard there was an unfortunate misunderstanding at your house. Men grow careless when recovering property from distressed holdings. My dog bled for that misunderstanding. Dogs are loyal beyond wisdom. That is why people admire them and bury them young. Mara looked at him then, truly looked. He had no anger on his face, only regret shaped for public use. 2 women from the mercantile had stopped close enough to hear. Crowther knew it. He lowered his voice, just enough that it felt private, while still being offered to witnesses. Come tomorrow, sign the surrender, and I will remove Ridgefall from the auction list. I will even see that the dog is treated by Dr. Vale. You would buy my silence with my own land and a bandage. I would prevent further humiliation. No, Mara said. You would prefer I arrive quiet. The women by the mercantile pretended not to hear, but neither moved away. Crowther's eyes cooled. Public rooms have a way of making grief look smaller than it feels. So does water under land you called worthless. For the first time, his gaze sharpened without a smile to hide it. Then he tipped his hat. "I hope you sleep, Mrs. Bell. Tomorrow may be long." That night, Ridgefall filled with waiting. Ada sat by the stove with the shotgun across her knees. Jonas arrived after dark, carrying his narrow ledger under his coat, and looking as if every shadow had been hired to follow him. Ledger lay near the door, bandaged shoulder rising and falling, his old collar buckled around the folded rubbing. Mara read Thomas's letter once more by lamplight, then folded it away. At sunrise, they loaded Ledger into the wheelbarrow. "You cannot bring a dog into a county auction," Jonas said. Mara looked down at Ledger. The old dog opened one eye. "They brought bank papers into my house," she said. "I will bring my witness into theirs." By the time they reached Mercy Fork, wagons lined both sides of Main Street. Ranchers, clerks, bidders, debtors, and curious townspeople crowded around the courthouse steps. Deputy Pike stood at the door with 2 men beside him. Crowther waited near the auction table, calm as a preacher before a sermon. The auction bell rang once. Ledger lifted his head, and somewhere under the courthouse floor, faint but steady, came the sound of water moving. The courthouse room was already full when Mara pushed Ledger's wheelbarrow through the door. Men turned first because of the dog, then stayed turned because of Mara. Ada Ren walked beside her with both hands empty, though everyone knew she had brought a shotgun as far as the steps. Jonas Reed came last, hat low, narrow ledger pressed beneath his coat. At the front table, Elias Crowther stood beside the auction clerk, with papers tied in red string. Deputy Pike blocked the aisle before Mara reached the benches. "No animals in county proceedings," Pike said. Mara looked down at Ledger. The old dog's bandaged shoulder rose and fell shallowly. His eyes were fixed not on Pike, but on the floorboards near the auction table. "He is quieter than most men in this room," Mara said. A few people stirred. Pike did not move. Crowther lifted one hand, gentle as a preacher settling children. "Let her pass, deputy. No one should say Mercy Fork feared a widow's dog. That kindness cost him nothing. The smile with it cost more." The auction clerk struck the bell. "Parcel 31, Ridgefall Ranch. Bank. Recovered acreage under provisional holding. Before you sell it," Mara said, "ask why water is running under this floor." The room tightened. Crowther sighed softly. "Mrs. Bell has suffered much. Grief sometimes mistakes sound for meaning." Ledger growled. The floor answered. Beneath the planks, faint and steady, water knocked through pipe. A rancher near the back took off his hat. "I hear it." "So do I," said another. "Old courthouse plumbing," Crowther said. "There is no courthouse plumbing under the auction table," Jonas said. Every face turned to him. Pike's hand dropped to his belt. "Careful, Reed." Jonas swallowed. For a terrible moment, Mara thought he would fold. Then he opened his ledger. "I repaired that floor line 12 years ago," Jonas said. "County Land Office survey plate. Station 1880, 1-24. Same line runs under Ridgefall, Ren Creek, and Little Ox." Crowther smiled with regret. "A debtor's memory is a flexible thing." Jonas laid his book on the table. "My accounts are less flexible. 3 days after Thomas Bell's funeral, I was paid from Crowther Bank and Trust to replace trough boards and seal the west service joint. No customer signature. No county order." Pike stepped forward and closed the ledger. "Private account books are not evidence in a county sale." Ada's voice cut through the room. "Then take mine too." She placed Samuel Wren's map piece beside Jonas's book. Mara added Thomas's letter, the rubbing from the CLO plate, and the torn scraps that still showed the blue line. Crowther's smile thinned. "Stolen papers, widow tales, and the word of a frightened mechanic. Is this what we are calling proof?" Some men muttered agreement. Others looked at the auction notices in their hands and said nothing. Mara saw fear moving through the room, not because people doubted the water, but because believing it meant admitting how much had been taken while they watched. Pike reached for Ledger's collar. "If there is anything hidden on that dog, it is subject to seizure." Ledger bared his teeth. Too weak to rise, but not too weak to warn. The room saw the bandage, the blood, and the old dog guarding a strip of charcoal-rubbed paper like it was bone. Mara unbuckled the collar herself and laid the rubbing flat. "County letters. County number. County pipe." Crowther placed a deed on top of the pile. "And a legal surrender signed by Thomas Bell before his death." Mara saw the backward curl in the final L before anyone spoke. "Thomas never wrote his name that way." "That is sentiment," Crowther said. "No, said a voice from the doorway. It is useful. Tom Vale, the stage driver, stood there with a dust-covered man in a county coat. The man carried Mara's envelope, opened at the top, and a leather case marked Abilene County Land Office. I am Silas Grant, the man said. Deputy Clerk, County Land Records. This woman's letter reached us yesterday. I came because Station 1880, 1 to 24, is county survey property, not bank property. Crowther's face changed only enough for Mara to see the mask pull tight. Grant examined the deed Crowther had placed down. The signature may be copied, but the acreage line is altered. The ink on the date is newer than the ink on the name. That is speculation, Crowther said. Grant opened his case. Then we will compare it with the county duplicate. Voss, the man with red-striped tobacco in his hatband, moved from the wall too quickly. Ledger saw him before Mara did. The old dog lunged out of the wheelbarrow with a sound that was half bark, half pain, and caught the cuff of Voss's coat. Voss stumbled. A packet dropped from inside his coat and burst open on the floor. Blue survey ribbon spilled out. So did 3 folded papers marked with Crowther Bank seal. One was the missing Little Ox map piece. The room rose in noise. Pike seized Mara's arm. Enough. No, Grant said. Now it is enough to suspend the sale. Mara picked up the Little Ox piece and fitted it to Ada's and Thomas's torn scraps. The blue line joined cleanly. Ridgefall, Ren Creek, Little Ox. Then the line continued beneath the courthouse toward the public stock trough behind the jail yard. Jonas pointed to the station numbers. R17, R18, R21, R24, reservoir stations. Ada faced the room. My Samuel was told Ren Creek failed because he was careless. Calder was told the same. Mara was told Thomas died chasing a dream. All of us were handed shame before we were shown paper. Mara lifted Thomas's letter. Thomas found the line. Samuel Wren found it. Calder buried proof at Little Ox. Your men sealed valves, removed handles, took maps, and let poor families sell land you already knew had water. You did not buy dead ranches. You killed them first. No one spoke. Crowther turned to the crowd, softer now. You are letting pain make a villain of a man who extended credit when others would not. Ledger dragged himself toward the fallen papers and stood over them, shaking. Blood spotted through his shoulder bandage. He had no strength left to bite anyone. He only stood between Crowther and the proof. Grant gathered the documents. This auction is suspended. These parcels are under county review. Mr. Crowther, these bank records will come with me. When Voss edged toward the door, Pike caught him by the collar and held him still. It was the first honest thing Mara had seen the deputy do. Justice did not arrive like thunder. It came like water through a choked pipe, slow at first, then impossible to deny. By sunset, the auction notices had been torn down. By the next week, Crowther Bank's ledgers were locked in the county office. Voss had named 2 hired men, and Pike had surrendered his badge pending inquiry. Crowther was not dragged through the street. Men like him rarely were. He was removed by paper, witness, seal, and signature, the same tools he had sharpened against others. 3 days later, Ridgefall's trough ran clear. Mara stood beside it with Thomas's letter in her hand. Ada had gone home. Jonas had stayed long enough to replace the valve stem properly, then left without asking forgiveness. Ledger lay in the shade, too tired to rise when the first water spilled into the boards he had nearly died opening. Mara filled a tin cup and held it to him. This time, Ledger drank. Only a little. 3 slow laps. Enough. Mara poured the rest into the trough and watched the rings spread across the surface. For a moment, she could see the sky there, broken by the windmill blades, mending itself each time the water settled. The grass had not turned green. The fences still leaned. Debt had not vanished with one honest stream of water, but the land no longer felt like a grave. She unfolded Thomas's letter once more. You should have told me, she said to the quiet yard. The windmill turned above her, steady and slow. Then Mara rested her hand on Ledger's silver head. But you did send him home.